is a big field, everybody. So if you're watching this and you're like, you've been using AI in ways that you have no idea about, autocorrect on your phone, Google Maps, Siri, Alexa, everything from Google search, all of that is going to have artificial intelligence or what we call machine learning in the background.
My name is Khadeejah, and I'm a member of NAMLE's Youth Advisory Council. I'm also a student journalist, and I'm passionate about the way that media and stories can mobilize our communities through storytelling. And just to start off, to introduce Amanda Bickerstaff is the founder and CEO for AI for Education. She's passionate about AI use in school in both K-12 and higher education settings. So we're excited to be in conversation with her today.
I'm looking forward to it.
As a first question, since NAMLE is a constant resource for educators and those in education media spaces, I really want to know what is some applications of AI that we've seen in classrooms and what are some effective uses that we've seen in recent years?
Well, I think that we have to look at this as a little bit different than most technology. Like this isn't necessarily an implemented and thoughtful approach. This is the fastest growing consumer technology that's ever happened. And we know that young people are using these tools. You're in college. OpenAI has been very open that, their largest demographic are students between 18 and 24. If you added 13 to 17-year-olds, I think you would start to see like close to probably 40% of users are students and young people, if not more. And so I think that I would kind of shift our question a little bit. I think what's happening is young people are seeing and feeling these tools and using them in multiple formats. So for example, Snapchat AI was one of the first really available tools. I mean, it was in Snapchat. It's primarily used by Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And today it has 150 million users. And so it's really going to be just behind ChatGPT in terms of usage. And so I think that that's been the largest kind of impact. I will say that it goes beyond schoolwork. I think we do know that young people are using these tools for both like positive and also like maybe some areas that are not so positive where they're using it to brainstorm, be creative, get feedback when they don't have support for that, or on the other end, maybe using it to do their work. We talk about cognitive offload versus cheating. Like generative AI is like an easy button for a lot of what we do as young people. Like a lot of if you're in class at all, it's very easy to give away that thinking. So that I think is happening quite a bit. But we also know that young people are using these tools for social emotional purposes, getting advice. Acting as friends or even sometimes partners, like romantic partners. And so it's really, really fascinating what's happening. But in terms of implementation, I think most schools have not really started to thoughtfully implement this into the classroom. There are chatbots like that have been made from Gen AI ed tech tools like School AI and Magic School, where you can kind of talk to a literary character or get brainstorming support. Those are primarily used in elementary schools, which is really interesting because we know that there's very little AI literacy happening in elementary school. So it's quite interesting that that probably is the largest amount of implementation. But then there are other use cases where some people are really, like some teachers are really embracing this. I would say it's very interesting because English teachers are probably the teachers that probably dislike the tool the most and also have been the most innovative. And the reason being is that the impact of young people using generative AI in English classrooms has forced either a negative reaction or a really like innovative positive reaction because of just how much students are using them.
You also referred to this idea of thoughtfully implementing AI in classrooms. Could you expand on that a little bit more and maybe depict what that could look like in a classroom and what educators can look towards when it comes to thoughtful implementation?
So I'll ask you, how old are you, Khadijah?
I'm
Are you
18.
18. So you are what we would consider a digital native, right? You've had devices almost your entire life. You've had the internet. But was it having a device and internet enough to actually know how to use it meaningfully and responsibly and safely? The answer is no. I'm gonna guess. I won't speak for you, but what do you think?
I would agree with you.
So we talk a lot about how digital native does not equal digital literate. The same way that like having a device or application doesn't make you inherently good at using it or even like ethical about it. And so when we talk about responsible, intentional implementation, it can't just be, oh, we have a chatbot, or we are integrating generative AI into students' work, or we're going to allow it on this assignment. Because young people and adults, this technology is so different than any technology that's come before it. And if you don't have intentional AI literacy, then you don't know the limitations or the capabilities. And in fact, a lot of us don't even know how to ask a good question. And so much of generative AI is being able to ask a good question, give feedback, give targeted feedback, evaluate outputs, and then be creative. And even sometimes be resilient because it doesn't work as expected. Like those are things that like we don't do very often with technology. We might do it like if you were talking to me, right? We're gonna have a conversation. It feels more natural to access all those skills, but we've never done that with technology. So what we would suggest is like intentional implementation starts with AI literacy. And for us, AI literacy at AI for Education means that you have the knowledge, the skills, but also the mindsets, like literally the mindsets that allow you to use AI in three ways: safely, ethically, and effectively. We call it the C framework. And the reason why we do that is it has to be broad enough, right? That you're using it in ways that are meaningful to you, but also responsible and safe. And I mean, honestly, like you can think, oh, I'm going to give ChatGPT or Perplexity all this information about myself and not realize that that could actually lead to biased outputs, or the outputs change because we are women, for example. Or it could be something where like we use a chatbot that looks like it's safe, but it's really not. It's like we think we're using ChatGPT, but we're not using ChatGPT. And maybe some of our information is being collected and sold. Or we're using the technology and saying, it says this is real, and then we submit that and like it's not real, it's made it up. Like there were 20 lawyers in May alone that used case brief in submitted case brief that was made up by ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. So if 20 adults that have been through a lot of education are making some mistakes, it's why we think very strategically about you got to learn what this is and isn't and how to use the tools. We can't just expect that getting access is enough.
And I think this conversation is also opening up a larger conversation regarding how AI fundamentally works. And I'm also wondering if you can expand on, as we talk about how AI is structured and how it works, the potential biases that can be embedded within AI and AI systems.
Absolutely. Well, so AI is a big field, everybody. So if you're watching this and you're like, you've been using AI in ways that you have no idea about, autocorrect on your phone, Google Maps, Siri, Alexa, everything from Google search, all of that is going to have artificial intelligence or what we call machine learning in the background. And so while when we talk about AI literacy, of course, it is important to recognize that AI is much bigger. I think that what we're really talking about in this moment in time is generative AI literacy. And so generative AI is a subset of AI. So you have machine learning and a subset of that called deep learning. And what that does is it takes, these tools are able to take enormous amounts of data. And realistically, the data in the shape of like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini is from the internet. Think every single website, every publicly available book, every pirated book, every Reddit thread, every Wikipedia page, every New York Times article, every Google image, stock photo, even like we talk about even YouTube videos and transcripts. And what happens is these tools are able to essentially predict the next word or pixel in an image or piece of code if you're coding. And so they're really like fascinating and complex probability machines. So if you think about probabilities, then if you see something that is highly probable, it means that you've seen that a lot in the training data set. And so, for example, if we go back to stock photos, so I'm a CEO. So any ladies out there that want to be a CEO, like love it, or boys or men as well. But when you look at stock photos or the internet, a CEO is not going to be represented like me. It will not look like me or sound like me or even be represented in media like me. And so what happens is these tools, because they're probabilistic, what they do is they amplify those biases that are implicit or baked into the things that we create, the human data that we create, and then it amplifies it. And I think that's where it really gets interesting is that bias is a part of everything that we do. It's part of evolution. It is part of and parcel of every human society. But when you add a probabilistic nature on top of it, it's going to really amplify those biases. And so if I went to ChatGPT or Midjourney, or I went to Gemini and asked for an image of a CEO giving a board meeting, we would have to do a couple tries before it looked like a non-male, for example. And so that's where critical evaluation, because if you just do it once, you're like, okay, that's great. But if you do it 100 times, and like it's a male every time, or it's 87 or 90% of the time, what you're going to start to realize is that some things are overrepresented, right? And so whether that's gender, it could be body types, it could be ethnicities, it could be religions in some cases. And so that's where understanding how these tools work come in play, because while like an image generator, it's going to be harder for me to like work against that bias because of the way that they work and are trained. If I use ChatGPT and I say, avoiding traditional biases about CEOs and gender, provide a vignette or a story about a young CEO or whatever, I would have a better chance of that giving me a less biased answer, because what I'm doing is I'm anticipating the bias and then I'm working against it actively. And I think that that is where the power comes in, because when you use generative AI like ChatGPT, you're building with technology, and instead of having to code, you're using words. I mean, you don't even have to type. If you're like, oh, typing, you can just talk to ChatGPT, and that's coding. And you're driving the outputs of the bot in ways that have never been possible before.
I think as we also talk about AI, especially in an educational setting, there is a major conversation as well about AI and its impact on the job market. So I'm wondering, as we also talk about ethics, bias, and futurity, are there any intersections between the job market and these biases that we were also talking about?
Well, let's take that in two parts, because if you think about the impact of AI on the job market before, we can talk about two things. We can talk about like an applicant tracking system that uses AI to filter out resumes. There's already been instances where they filtered out those with untraditional names or backgrounds that could be highly biased against and actually lead to like hiring practices that are going to not just reinforce but amplify biases in hiring practices. So I just want to kind of call that out as like something that's already happened. But I think what you're speaking about specifically is that the ways in which we need to think about this is that generative AI has capabilities that were uniquely human up to 3 years ago. And in a way that is significantly more comprehensive than something like a graphic calculator, Excel macros, or something along those lines. And so what's happened is what was uniquely human 5 years ago, 3 years ago, is no longer the case. And so you can use generative AI to replicate or automate a lot of what we do in jobs, whether that is written communication, coding, design, feedback, copy editing, all of those pieces. And so what's happening is, I would say the majority of the disruption today is being felt in two ways. One is like internally, meaning like organizations are having some people that are like really going far and really being strategic about their own adoption, and they're driving more worth for the organization or themselves, right? Maybe they're saving a bit of time and getting to do passion projects. Maybe they're helping to automate out those like lower hanging fruits and just being the critical evaluator at the end. So that's happening. But the other part, what we are starting to see, and we will see, so the World Economic Forum report that came out at the beginning of this year says that there's going to be a pretty significant disruption in terms of jobs, like up to 170 million new jobs and 92 million lost jobs by 2030. That is when you graduate, my friend. Like it's not that far in the future. But what I will say is that we already are seeing, there's a recent report by Stanford it's calling like the canary in the coal mine jobs. So these are jobs that are very close to the trained data set, which means like a lot of ChatGPT was trained on code bases or creative writing or journalistic writing, for example. And so jobs in those spaces, especially the entry level, are starting to be less common. So, for example, in those kind of exposed areas, like 13% of entry level jobs have started to disappear. We also see that freelance work, like if you look at Upwork or others, that they're more like less job postings for freelance work because organizations are able to do that. We see very, like, I mean, just in general, because of the political nature of everything that's happening, but we see very little movement on new job creation. And so we do know that there's a short-term and a large-term impact. I will say, though, there's some encouragement here in terms of the skills of the future are not going to be like, I am going to be the best at MLA and formatting and copy editing. It's going to be like, I understand how to be creative and a critical thinker. I'm going to know how to identify opportunities. I don't know how to be, I'm going to be super creative and I'm going to lean into what makes me human. I'm going to know how to be agile and learn consistently. Like the idea that the things that we learn, you don't just go and they stop, that they have to keep learning. And in fact, if I am agile in a way that I don't have to be the expert, but I can keep working with the technology or collaborative partners, that I can actually like do more than ever. Like that's something that's really interesting. But I don't think we can, in any way, shape, or form, not recognize the disruption that's coming in terms of jobs that will be highly automated, like customer service, or highly like augmented like coding where like a lot of code is being written by generative AI that a traditional like maybe entry level coder would do, but then it's being evaluated, debugged, and deployed by those with like more experience. So there is a very interesting time. And for the young people watching this, I think that your best protocol to start is two things. One is to think about building your AI literacy so you don't get swept up in this moment and you can use this to the best of your ability moving forward. And second is to really think about what you care about. Really, like, what are your passions? Where are the places in which you can get the most? So the people that get the most out of generative AI today are the people that use their own expertise and creativity to use these tools to augment, to empower, to even like, kind of be assistive in the places we don't love. And so I think that those two pieces, plus maybe just being open to like learning and relearning, that those are going to be the places that are going to really prepare you for this shifting job market.
And for this conversation at the intersection of AI literacy and education and media literacy, what are some ways or systems we can look towards that can empower teachers right now in this environment when it comes to teaching at the intersection of media and AI?
I think the first thing is we have to take the hidden nature of it away. It cannot be AI is bad. In fact, okay, so I'm gonna tell a story for my educators, but also for my students out there listening, is that we have a workshop on redefining assessment. And it really talks about how do we reframe assessment to be more authentic and intentional, but also maybe at times have AI like be a part of the process instead of something that is completely and totally taken out, especially as we build towards AI literacy. And there were two teachers that came into the last session who were adamant that AI was bad. And in fact, we're almost willing to like yell at me and like we're like they were very lovely, but very, it was holding it in a very deep negative place. And we went through and we talked about it. We kept moving. And I talked about, AI as a tool and like what it means. And the very end of the session, when the teachers was like, "Oh, Amanda," and I thought that like I had not, it was going to be another like, this is bad. But she said, "I just had an epiphany. My issue with student AI use is not that the AI, it's the ways in which students are using AI. Students are primarily using AI in the most superficial and potentially worst way possible. What they're doing is they're taking what I give them, they're putting it in ChatGPT, and they're getting an answer. They're cutting and pasting and not reading it, and they're submitting it to me, and they don't think I know. Or and she's like, it actually has nothing to do with the AI itself. It has to do with two things. One is the AI literacy that is lacking to be able to understand that that is not going to be the right way to use these tools, but also that the tool, the way it has been implemented itself is a problem. And I think that when we think about that, if we have such fear and uncertainty where we have students that are really using these tools in both meaningful and also in more kind of academically dishonest ways. And then the other end, we have kids that are actively avoiding any AI use because we're good kids. We don't want to be accused of cheating. We care a lot. And all we've heard is AI is bad. And so, what our first step for everybody, and I'm going to say this to young people too, if you can be transparent, But what we want is adults to be transparent first and take this out of the shadows and say it's okay. And you can ask me questions and we can learn together. Here's the thing. There's no reason why we cannot co-construct learning and knowledge together because there is not an expert in a school. Doesn't mean if it's a 15-year-old or a 50-year-old. We are all learning together, and this is a real opportunity to do that. So I think that that's number one. Number two is do not integrate generative AI into a classroom until you've done AI literacy work. And that means starting with your own AI literacy and then identifying ways to do that. And it has to focus on more than just the ethical component of the C framework. It should also be about safety, about human and AI like interactions and like cognitive offload, safety, other ethical considerations, but also around if it's 13 to 17 or up, effective use. Get in there, show them the things that don't work, show them the things that do. Look at bias. Do this crazy thing and see like there's something called sycophancy. Well, ChatGPT will say yes to anything almost, unless it's like egregiously bad. That allows for like some of it, is not going to be output you want, but that creativity, that opportunity there. So I think that those two pieces are what we focus the most on because when we see that happen, it means that people are working together, like students and teachers are working together instead of at cross purposes and against each other, which I think is what's really happening right now in a lot of our schools.
I also wanted to ask, especially as we talk about young people, education, there's a growing conversation about the environmental impact of AI. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about that and also how we approach those conversations.
So, this is something that I think is a really good place to have a discussion. I will say it is probably the area that is most nuanced in the sense of when ChatGPT first came out, it was actually quite environmentally intensive to like do a prompt or create an image or even 10 images. And what's happened is, as the tools have become more sophisticated over the last 3 years, the environmental cost of individual use of most, like meaning like I'm doing 10 prompts at a time and like maybe an image there, an image here, is actually relatively the same as what Google was about 10 years ago. And so the environmental cost at the individual level is becoming more sustainable as the technology becomes cheaper, essentially, and more efficient. The thing that is also true is that on the other side, a lot of it's not like we build like Chat OpenAI builds one model that's very, very environmentally like expensive. Like ChatGPT 5 cost a lot of money to train and that like a lot. There is an enormous environmental cost at the company enterprise level that are building these models. Enormous. That's where you see the data centers going up. That's where you see water use being significant. And the thing is that's so interesting about this moment in time is that the individual consumer, it's almost, I don't want to be too casual about it, but it's like the idea that if you change your light bulbs at the individual level, that's enough to make a big environmental change. And that was disproven, right? The majority of energy use is actually by enormous conglomerates and companies, that even our changes are going to be minimal against the organizations that are using most of the energy. The same thing is going to be true of generative AI, that these big tech companies that are in a race for better generative AI towards what we call AGI or artificial general intelligence or super intelligence means that they're going to continue to train and build and deploy new models that are going to drive a lot of that energy consumption. So I think that what we have to do is, of course, I would suggest very strongly if something like Notebook LM takes a long time to build a video overview or an audio overview, or deep research takes 5 to 8 minutes, that is environmentally more intensive at the individual level than a prompt that takes, it gives you a response in 50 tokens. Like, and so if you like, maybe don't build, if you get really into anime, don't build hundreds of images, build one or two. Like, that's where I would say that if you're really like a super user, there might be a larger environmental cost. But for the most part, because of the ways in which these tools have become more efficient and the more cost benefits, that the majority of the energy usage is at the large company level, specifically in and around building new models.
And this conversation was really robust as we talked about AI in education, ways to empower teachers, ethical concerns. But I also want to pose a larger question. What does the future of AI look like in these coming years, whether it be in the educational space or beyond?
Well, we somehow, Khadijah, I've become a futurist in this. Like, by the way, everybody, I started as a teacher. Like, I was a high school biology teacher. I've been an ed tech CEO. Like, I'm a PhD dropout for any of those that are thinking about getting their PhD. You can do it. I didn't do a great job. But what I would say is that, like, when we pulled together our futurist convening, we focus on like kind of possible futures. And I think that there, at least for schooling, there are couple possible futures where one is that we just refuse to change. Like the classroom and schools have changed very little over the last 20 to 30 years. And so if that's the case, then what would happen is we would no longer be preparing young people for the world. We would be forcing pen and paper, no AI use. It would all be, like you would be expected by hiring managers even today to know how to use these tools. You're in college, you're gonna go oral exams only from your professors and nothing changes. And then when you get to your career, you're highly underprepared for a shifting world. The second possible future we talked about is where we over commit and trust AI systems start making decisions for us. We take the human out of the loop and we start to like schooling becomes so much about your AI companion. It tells you what you're good at. It almost is like that leveling or like you're on a track, right? The bluebird track of reading, which has been shown to have like pretty significant negative impacts on learning growth. We focus too much on surveillance in terms of schools. We focus on compliance, and these tools help us do that. The third possible future, and there are more that we talked about, is where we use this as an opportunity to reframe what education can be. Assessment isn't about getting it done, it's about and learning experiences aren't just about getting it done. It's about being able to like build essential skills that are not just going to be about that moment in time of can you tell me everything you learned about generative AI in this conversation, but more about like durable skills like collaboration and critical thinking, evaluation, creativity. And we lean into that, but we also lean into the new opportunities where these tools, like maybe we do have tools that start to like they could be like a master scheduling technique where not only where the student gets the best thing at the best time, but the teachers have, some teachers maybe are better off at being one-on-one versus all whole group, or have always wanted to do a special class but never had the time. And like, but now we know how many students are willing to do it, and we know that we have the teacher, we can create this brand new space for creativity and innovation. I think that that's where AI becomes an extension to like what makes us uniquely human and actually is the forcing mechanism to improve what we know has needed to be improved for a long time. I think we cannot underrepresent that generative AI, we are living through an inflection point that is similar to the industrial revolution in terms of impact on communication, where we live, how we live, who we keep like schooling, work, etc. But it's happening much faster. And we cannot underestimate, like when people talk about hype cycles, there's something called a Mars law that we tend to overestimate the short-term impact of technology and underestimate the long-term impact. And so what's happening is that some people are feeling like, oh, things haven't changed that much. Maybe there's AI overviews over here, or I'm using ChatGPT a little bit or Claude or whatever. But what they're not recognizing is that 40% of all generative AI is used to code. So not only will generative AI and AI improve, but also technology in general, whether it's robotics, automation, diagnostic medicine, like are all happening in the background, that there are going to be these significant shifts into what's possible and what the impact will be. And so when we think about the future, like we have to be like participants in the future. We cannot like think, oh, it's not that big a deal right now, or I don't need to know this much, or I'm just going to use it to like, do this over here, but not really think about the implications for myself and the future. Like that means that we are not active participants. It means that we're going to be receivers. We're going to have to react to what happens. And so I think that there's really the reason why AI for Education, we have our mission is up until this month was AI literacy for 1 million educators, and we've actually expanded that to students. So that's something that is very new, is because we believe very strongly that AI literacy, foundational AI literacy that's intentional and meaningful and really like human centered is the thing we have to do. Because if we can get to enough people that know what this is and isn't, then we can start making better decisions and also putting pressure on lawmakers and big tech and the people that actually are going to have the biggest impact because we can do it as a collective and we can do it as a informed collective. But if we don't do that, we're going to start to see this like influx of enormous change about things that could actively harm young people, harm the job market in ways that are deeply, deeply negative, and potentially like cause like some fragmenting and or devaluing of what makes us special.
And there's always one more question I want to ask at the end of every interview, but is there anything else that you want to add that I didn't ask about or you think I should know?
I mean, I think that, we want young people to lead this. And I think that, Khadijah, you're a great example of this. But one of the things that I think that we're surprised by at this level is like, it almost feels like an inevitability of like, oh, it's just here and it's going to happen instead of it being like more of like an opportunity to like understand and to be a part of what happens next. And so there are great groups like NAMLE and others like Encode Justice and happening around the country, both in terms of higher K-12 and higher education. But I would love to see as a moment forward, like this is the opportunity for students to truly lead. And you can go to in fact, we have had interns at Futurist Convening we talked about had two high schoolers. So 10% of the entire room were high schoolers. Like you could just go and say, hi, dean or principal, I don't know enough about this to feel prepared for the future. How can we do this together? And instead of it being like combative, it's like, we'll create student ambassadors, we'll help train, we'll find identify places, but like, let's do this together. And I would love to see that happening because if there's a groundswell of teachers and students really doing that, then when we get to the workforce or we have opportunities to push back when pushback is necessary or to ask good questions or to even like, your feet, like you vote with your feet or your cash, so to speak, that we're making those decisions in meaningful ways. So I just want to say, like, there really is a moment of empowerment here, but that has to be taken by young people and by educators. I just believe that so wholeheartedly, and it actually isn't so crazy. We know that good AI literacy can be built in a couple hours with. Like it doesn't have to take you 10 years. And actually, it's much more fun and meaningful than a lot of things that you're learning today. You just have to have the right partner and the commitment to doing it.
And I think as we end there, I hope this conversation can lead to more within classrooms, among educators and students. But I want to thank you for your time, Amanda, and for being able to speak with me today.